The image of Medusa, the snake-haired gorgon of Greek mythology, has fascinated and frightened audiences for millennia. Known for her petrifying gaze, Medusa has often been depicted as a monstrous figure, a woman cursed, feared, and ultimately slain by the hero Perseus. The Medusa myth is one of transformation and paradox. Her image embodies beauty and horror, power and victimization, life and death. While Medusa is usually depicted with distinctively Greek features, some historians and scholars now raise the question of whether Medusa may have originated as a black figure, linking her story to African mythology and iconography. This interpretation brings a compelling new dimension to the Medusa myth, challenging the Eurocentric representations of one of mythology's most misunderstood characters. To understand how Medusa might have connections to African traditions, we must examine the ancient world and its intercultural exchanges. The Greek civilization, as many historians have established, was not a geographically or culturally isolated entity. Situated at the crossroads of Asia, Europe, and Africa, the Greeks interacted extensively with Egyptian, Nubian, Phoenician, and even further-flung African civilizations. These interactions were not limited to trade, but included the exchange of philosophical ideas, religious beliefs, and myths. Some scholars argue that Medusa's myth contains elements that might have originated from African beliefs, especially given that some ancient sources hint at her origins being outside of mainland Greece, potentially pointing to Libya or regions further south. The physical description of Medusa, especially in early mythological accounts, aligns intriguingly with African aesthetics and symbolism. In some depictions, Medusa is described with dark skin and attributes associated with African deities and spirits, particularly those connected to the concept of transformation and mysticism. The serpent imagery, which is central to Medusa's story, is also profoundly symbolic within African cultures. In several African spiritual traditions, serpents are venerated as symbols of rebirth, fertility, and protection. West African mythology, for example, often represents the serpent as a creature of wisdom, power, and spiritual depth. This respect for the serpent as an emblem of mystical power may suggest a cultural parallel with Medusa's gorgon form, where the snake hair serves not only as a mark of her otherness, but also as a representation of her power and sacred mystery. The links between Medusa and African deities extend beyond serpent symbolism. In North African mythology, particularly among the Berbers of Libya, a goddess figure known as Lamia bears similarities to Medusa's story. Lamia, like Medusa, was a beautiful woman cursed into a monstrous form, known for her vengeful nature and association with snakes. Ancient Greek texts mention that Medusa hailed from Libya, a region of North Africa that was rich in its own complex system of beliefs and powerful deities. Medusa's physical appearance and association with a non-Greek landscape could thus suggest a borrowing or transformation of a North African myth within the Greek mythological framework. Medusa's tragic life story also reflects certain themes present in African mythology. Medusa was once a beautiful priestess of Athena who was cursed by the goddess after she was violated by Poseidon within Athena's temple. This transformation from beauty to monstrosity, from power to victim, echoes a profound motif in African oral traditions, where gods and spirits often change their forms as expressions of deep emotion, loss, or betrayal. In certain African cultures, this type of transformation is considered a sacred manifestation of a person's soul and power. This suggests that Medusa's transformation might not solely be a punishment, as Greek mythology presents, but a powerful and necessary transformation in response to violation and defilement, a concept well understood in African religious thought. Furthermore, the way Medusa's story has been interpreted over the centuries raises important questions about how ancient African figures and symbols were reimagined in European art and literature. During the Renaissance, artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Caravaggio depicted Medusa as a terrifying yet beautiful European woman, erasing any non-European elements from her image. This trend continued into modern portrayals, cementing a European version of Medusa that overlooks her potential African roots. Such reinterpretations have been critiqued as a form of cultural appropriation, as they reflect the gradual erasure of African contributions and the frequent recasting of African symbols and narratives through a Eurocentric lens. A deeper reading of the Medusa myth through an African lens also brings to light themes of resilience, defiance, and autonomy. Despite her monstrous form, Medusa exudes a potent form of resistance. Her gaze, the ability to turn men to stone, represents an inversion of typical mythological narratives, where women are often passive or subservient to male heroes. In Medusa's case, her gaze is a weapon, one that she wields against those who would harm her. This defensive power resonates with certain African myths about powerful female deities and protectresses who ward off evil with their strength or spiritual energy. In African spiritual systems, figures such as Mami Wata, a water spirit associated with protection, fertility, and strength, mirrors some of Medusa's attributes. Mami Wata is often portrayed with serpentine features or surrounded by water creatures, connecting her to similar concepts of femininity, mysticism, and spiritual power. Medusa's story can also be seen as a narrative of colonization and assimilation, as her image and significance were appropriated by a Greek cultural narrative that transformed her from a possible African goddess figure into a monster to be slain. This process echoes a broader historical trend in which African deities and symbols were transformed or demonized by cultures that wished to assert dominance. By reimagining Medusa within a European heroic narrative, her power is ultimately neutralized, her image altered to fit a Greek vision of monstrosity rather than sacred power. This process of cultural appropriation and redefinition of African symbols persists in many areas of mythology and folklore, raising questions about the ongoing erasure and recontextualization of African influences in global storytelling. Additionally, the classical Greek portrayal of Medusa as a tragic and fearsome figure could reflect Greek attitudes toward Africa itself, which was often viewed with a mixture of fascination and fear. The Greeks were aware of Africa's vast resources, military prowess, and advanced knowledge systems, and these attributes sometimes engendered apprehension and respect. Medusa, as a figure from North Africa associated with both beauty and terror, could symbolize this ambivalent relationship, embodying both the allure and mystery of Africa as seen from the Greek perspective. In this sense, Medusa's image could serve as a metaphor for Africa's complex relationship with the ancient world, a land admired yet often misrepresented by those who did not fully understand it. Moreover, reimagining Medusa as a black figure invites us to reinterpret her story as one of empowerment rather than defeat. Seen through an African-centered perspective, Medusa's transformation and her ultimate fate reflect a type of resilience and self-possession that defies her victimization. Her eventual death at the hands of Perseus is not just a triumph for the Greek hero, but can be seen as the suppression of a powerful woman of color, a story that has historical echoes in the treatment of African women who defied societal norms. By reclaiming Medusa as a figure of African origin, we honor her resilience and give voice to her strength, emphasizing the legacy of African women as powerful, multidimensional figures in history and mythology. While much of this interpretation relies on indirect connections and comparative mythology, the possible African roots of Medusa offer a rich field for further exploration. Her story, while Greek in its known form, may reflect a broader tapestry of Mediterranean and African influences. Just as ancient Greece borrowed from the myths, science, and culture of Egypt and other African civilizations, Medusa's story may indeed be one of the earliest examples of an African figure's transformation and appropriation within Western storytelling.